Hello and welcome to all my dear lovely students. So once again, I Ayushi Agarwal welcomes you on this amazing platform of Physics Wallah in your very own excellence batch. So far, we have studied 3 lectures of the chapter Sexual Reproduction in Flowering Plants, where we have discussed that how male and female gametes are produced respectively on androecium and gynoecium. But today we are going to study that how these gametes are basically transferred, that how pollen grain carrying male gamete are transferred towards the female gamete for fertilization. So today's lecture is all about dealing in with the next important topic of the chapter, that is pollination. Now what is pollination, beta? Pollination simply means the transmission of pollen grains from the stigma to the anther of same flower, or different flower but born on the same plant, or different plant but of same species. So let's read the definition what is written on the screen. So transmission of pollen grain from the anther to the stigma of either same flower or different flower but born on the same plant, or again different plant but of same species. Now on this basis we have 2 types of pollination. One, autogamy, which is also known as self-pollination, and second, allogamy, which also means cross-pollination. So basically we have 2 types of pollination: autogamy and allogamy, self-pollination and cross-pollination respectively. So first we are going to understand what is autogamy, and then we will study about what is allogamy. Beta, auto means self. That means when both the sex organ, that is male sex organ androecium and female sex organ gynoecium, they are present on the same flower. So male gamete as well as female gamete both are born on the same flower, present on the same plant body. Such pollination which takes place within the same flower is known as self-pollination. That means this is a plant and this is suppose a flower. Correct? Let me draw a little beautiful flower. Now this is a flower which is carrying both the sex organ, that is your androecium, as well as female reproductive organ called gynoecium. So yes, these are the anthers which are going to carry pollen grain. You know how pollen grains are produced? Yes. And this is the stigma that is going to be the receptor of pollen grains. Now, since both the sex organs are present within the same flower, so there are high chances that the pollen grains, once released from the anther, they reach to the same stigma. If this type of pollination occurs, then it is known as self-pollination or autogamy. Have you understood this? Contrary to this is second type, which is known as cross or allogamy. That means when both the sex organ are not present in the same flower. When both the sex organs are not present in the same flower, then what has to be done? Cross-pollination or allogamy has to be followed. Now, beta, this cross-pollination can be of 2 types. Number 1 is geitonogamy. Geitonogamy, and Second type of cross-pollination is xenogamy. So there are two types of cross-pollination, that is geitonogamy and xenogamy. What is geitonogamy, beta? Geitonogamy type of cross-pollination is observed in monoecious plants. Monoecious plants like, for example, maize, coconut. Now what happens, beta? The flowers are different. The male flower, female flower, staminate and pistillate. The flowers are different, but they are born on the same body. Suppose this is a male flower, that is staminate, and this is the female flower, which is known as pistillate. They are born on the same plant. Now suppose this is the male flower which is going to produce the pollen grain. Now pollen grain, if they fall on the stigma of other flower but born on the same plant body, then this type of cross-pollination is known as geitonogamy. Right? Now geitonogamy is, beta, ecologically cross-pollination but genetically self-pollination. Why? See, beta, self-pollination means same plant body, same genes in the male sex organ also and female sex organ also. Same genes are there because they both are present on the same plant body. Same type of chromosomes are there carrying the same type of gene. So whatever offspring will be produced due to self-pollination will also be having the same genes. There will be no variation, no new genes are coming from another plant body, exactly the same gene of the parent and the children. So this is self-pollination, yes or no? Now same thing is happening in geitonogamy also now. Okay, flowers are different. So for the transmission of pollen grain, agents, pollinating agents will be required, but both the flower are present on the same body. As a result, beta, the new organism which will be born will carry the same gene. No new gene is coming. So you can say that geitonogamy is ecologically cross-pollination because agents will be involved for the transmission of pollen grain. But there will be no genetic evolution. The offspring is going to be the same as that of parents. So it is genetically self-pollination only. Getting my point? So what will you write for geitonogamy, beta? Geitonogamy is basically ecologically cross-pollination. How? Because pollinating agents are required. As agents for the transmission of pollen grains are required. Right? Whereas it is genetically self-pollination only. And what is the reason that why it is genetically self-pollination? The reason is as offspring produced is having the same genes as that of parent. As that of parent. Correct? Now, talking about xenogamy, beta, xenogamy is observed in dioecious plants. Like for example, date palm, papaya. Here, not only the flowers are different, but flowers are born on different plant also of same species. Like this. Right? So suppose this is a male flower and this is a female flower. Now both the flowers, they are born on different bodies. So genes automatically will be different. First of all, agents will be required. So it is ecologically cross-pollination. Now since the bodies are also different, so new organism which will be born will have variable genes of male parent plant as well as of female parent plant. Therefore, you can say that xenogamy is actually pure cross-pollination, both genetically and ecologically. So what you can write for this? It is both genetically and ecologically cross-pollination. Understood? Yes or no? The two types of cross-pollination, that is geitonogamy and xenogamy, and what is the concept behind them? Yes? Chalo. Very good. Now beta, there are some benefits of self-pollination and there are some benefits of cross-pollination. First, I am going to tell you that, and then we are going to study about the devices that promote self and cross-pollination respectively. So beta, if I talk about the benefits of self-pollination. Now you know what is self-pollination? What are the benefits? The only two benefits of self-pollination are: number one, no agents are required. No wind, water, animal, insect are required. See, whenever anther is going to burst, automatically pollen grain will fall in on its own stigma. So no agents are required. Thus, pollination is independent. Pollen grains need not to wait. Stigma need not to wait. Okay, pollen grains will come. When will they come? When the wind will bring? When the water will bring? No. Pollination is independent of agents. So first benefit, hence it is very time consuming. No waiting has to be done, so it is time consuming, right? So first point, pollination is independent of biotic or any pollinating agents, thus time conserving, not consuming, thus time conserving. Second beta, if suppose this flower would have been showing cross-pollination with the help of insects, so it need to produce nectars, it need to make it flower more showy, colorful, attractive, good smelling, so that it can attract the insect. Insect will come and then will take the pollen grain for pollination, right? However, here no such insects are involved, nothing is involved. So flowers may not be showy, may not be colorful, not with good smell. Still pollination will be done. Therefore, you can say if a flower is self-pollinated, it conserves its energy. It does not waste its energy in producing a beautifully attractive flower. Correct? So second point is this flower which is self-pollinated conserves energy. How? How it conserves energy? By not producing colorful flowers. The flowers need not to be brightly colored, scented in order to attract insect for pollination. It is doing it by itself and hence there is no trouble. Full energy is getting conserved over here. I hope both the benefits of self-pollination are clear. Now, the one disadvantage of self-pollination is the biggest advantage of cross-pollination, and that is inbreeding depression. If continuous self-pollination takes place beta, then what is going to happen? All the time new offspring produced will carry the same gene as that of parent. No variations, no different gene, no genetic improvement. Every time the same genes are transferred from the parent to the offspring. As a result, with every passing generations, the genes are going to become weak, and offspring, instead of being healthy, will become weaker than that of parent. And this is called as inbreeding depression. So that is why, in terms of evolution, in terms of variation, self-pollination is not good. Then plants actually prefer cross-pollination, even if it is not energy consuming, even if it is not energy conserving or time consuming. Getting my point? So the disadvantage of self-pollination is actually the advantage of cross-pollination, as it leads to inbreeding depression. It leads to inbreeding depression due to continuous self-pollination. Understood? Yes or no? Same genes are being transferred from the parent to the offspring, because of which the quality of gene with every passing generation keeps on getting reduced. Right? So what will you write the advantage of here? Small spaces. Okay, I'll write it over here. The advantage of cross-pollination is, with every round of cross-pollination, there will be new gene entry in the offspring. Hence, offsprings are going to be better than parents. So you can simply write no inbreeding depression. Simply, all the time new offsprings with genetic variations are being produced up. Clear? Now, advantages, disadvantages, definition, types is done. Now let's check out the contrivances of self and cross. Contrivances simply means devices that promotes either self or cross. So first we'll discuss the contrivances of self-pollination, and then we will discuss contrivances of cross-pollination. In self-pollination, the first contrivance, beta, it is bisexuality. Bisexuality means hermaphroditism. That means when the same flower will have both the sex organ, then only self-pollination can occur now. So first thing which is very important to ensure self-pollination is bisexuality. That means when both the sex organs are present on the same flower. So it can promote self-pollination. But will it guarantee self-pollination? Tell me, suppose this is a condition. This is a flower, this is a male sex organ, and this is the female sex organ. Now you can see bisexuality is there. But will this bisexuality 100% guarantee that the pollen grains of this is going to fall on the stigma and successful pollination will take place? Will it guarantee 100%? No. Bisexuality will promote self-pollination but cannot guarantee, because there are high risk that maybe pollen grains do not fall on its stigma, maybe they are carried away, or maybe there are some barrier present in between them, because of which the same pollen grain are not able to land on the stigma, and so many other maybes. So bisexuality is one of the device, you can say, that promotes self-pollination but do not guarantee. Right? Understood the first contrivance? Now, second is homogamy. Beta, along with bisexuality, the second important device which is responsible for promoting self-pollination is homogamy. Homo means same. Gamy means gamete. This means that both the male and female gamete should mature at the same time. It should not happen that, okay, pollen grains are matured, they are released, but stigma is not ready to receive it. Stigma is still a child. It has still not grown up to receive the pollen grain and to promote further events. Then, what is the point of bisexuality? It is of no use. So, homogamy means that there should be synchrony in the maturation time of both male and female gamete along with bisexuality. So, what is homogamy? Synchrony in the maturation time of both male and female gamete, so that if pollen grains mature, they release their pollen grain, stigma should be ready to accept it and allow the fertilization. So this is known as homogamy. Along with bisexuality, this is also very important. Moving ahead, third important contrivance device that promotes self-pollination is bud pollination. Like bud pollination exhibit in pea, in arachis, that is groundnut, rice. Now, what is bud pollination, beta? Sometimes what happens when the flower is present in its bud stage, kali, that means young flower. So, when the flower is young, at that time when it is present in bud stage, the flower is yet not open and still pollination, it is bisexual. Now, this bud is having both the sex organ inside it, male as well as female. Now, before the flower opens, pollination is already done. The anther has matured, it has released the pollen grain and it has fallen on its own stigma. So this is known as bud pollination. When the flower was present in its bud stage, it has still not opened and yet pollination is done. So bud pollination also ensures self-pollination. Okay. So what is bud pollination? When pollination occurs prior to opening of flower. That means in bud stage only, prior to opening of flower. Right? Like for example, in pea, in arachis, they show bud pollination. Arachis is basically groundnut, Arachis hypogaea. Right? Next contrivance which 100% ensures self-pollination only is cleistogamy. Cleistogamy means those flowers which never open. Now suppose there's a bisexual flower which is cleistogamous, which can never open, which will always remain in bud stage. So beta, where its pollen grain will go, whatever pollen grains are produced will fall in its own stigma. There is no chance for the escape of self-pollen grain and there is no chance for the entry of new pollen grain. So stigma has no other option rather than accepting its own pollen grain. Yes or no? So what is cleistogamy? Cleistogamy means flowers which never open. Flowers which never opens. As a result, it ensures 100% guarantee, like bisexuality cannot guarantee. But yes, cleistogamy will guarantee, it will ensure 100% self-pollination only. Right? So what are cleistogamy flowers? The flowers which never open. Opposite to cleistogamy are chasmogamy flowers, flowers which open. This is not a contrivance, but yet you should know that opposite to vice versa of cleistogamy is, here I am writing with other color pen, note point, chasmogamy. Chasmogamy is just the opposite term for cleistogamy. That means flower which open. Normally all flowers are chasmogamous. Right? Your rose, sunflower, they all open. They do not remain in bud stage. So they are chasmogamous flowers. Right? Now example of cleistogamy, that the ones which promotes cleistogamy are like Commelina, Oxalis, and Viola, which is commonly called as common pansy. All these three beta, they have both the types of flowers, cleistogamous as well as chasmogamous. The diagram is given in NCERT. These plants, they have two types of flowers on their body. Suppose this is a plant. On the lower side, they have cleistogamous flowers, the flowers which never open. Right? But on the top, they have chasmogamous flower which open. Correct? So lower flowers are chasmogamous, higher flowers are lower flowers are cleistogamous and higher flowers are chasmogamous. Both the types of flower are born on the same body. The lower ones are going to ensure 100% self-pollination. The above ones will show cross-pollination. Understood? So these are the four important devices that promote self-pollination. Now moving towards the contrivances that promotes cross-pollination or allogamy. First is unisexuality, also called as dicliny. Obviously, unisexual means the flower which is either staminate or pistillate, but not both. When both the sex organs are born differently on two different flowers. Correct? Yes or no? So write it. Unisexuality means when both the sex organs are not found within the same flower. When both the sex organs are not found in the same flower, then this is known as dicliny or unisexuality. Under this beta, there are two categories. Under this, there are two categories. One is monoecious, that promotes getonogamy. You have already studied beta. Examples like coconut, maize, right? Second is dioecious condition like date palm and papaya, which promotes xenogamy. I don't think I need to re-explain them. You all know what is ketonogamy and what is xenogamy. Okay. Second important contrivance is dichogamy. Suppose a flower is bisexual. But if the maturation time of both the sex organ, even in the same flower, is different, then too, even after having bisexuality, it will show cross-pollination. So dichogamy means there is no synchrony in the maturation of male and female sex organ. That means both male and female sex organs mature in two different timings. They do not show what? Synchrony. Now there are two conditions. One is called as protandry and second is known as protogyny. So in dichogamy also there are two conditions. Protandry and protogyny. Protandry condition means when androecium mature first and gynoecium is still not ready. So androecium has released its pollen grain. Male gametes have been discharged, but yet the stigma is not ready to receive it. So even after having bisexuality, it will not show self-pollination. Or opposite to is that protogamy condition where stigma is ready to receive the pollen grain, but its own pollen grains are yet not ready. So other plant body pollen grain will come, stigma will receive it and perform the fertilization. So even after having bisexuality, it will not show self-pollination. Rather, it will promote cross-pollination. Correct? Yes or no? So what is protogamy condition, beta? When gynoecium, when stigma matures first, then androecium. Right? And what is protoandry? Just the opposite. That means when androecium matures first than gynoecium. Yes or no? Understood everyone that the two contrivances to promote cross-pollination, unisexuality also called as dicliny and dichogamy. Moving towards the next. The third important is hercogamy. Hercogamy means presence of physical barrier in between the gynoecium and androecium if present in the same flower, like you see in case of calotropis. I'll show you what, but first let's write. Hercogamy means presence of physical barrier. Presence of physical barrier in between the two sex organs within the same flower. Organs within the same flower. So what is hercogamy? Presence of physical barrier in between the two sex organs within the same flower. Okay, no issues. Like for example, calotropis. Now, in calotropis beta, the pollen grains are borne in a sac-like structure called pollinium. So this is pollinium, inside which pollen grains are borne. So this sac-like structure or balloon-like structure is known as pollinium, inside which number of pollen grains are borne. Now, this pollinium comes in contact with the stigma, right? Now, what happens? Can you see that here the stigma and the pollen grains, they cannot come in direct contact because of the presence of this sac. There is a sac in between the stigma and the pollen grain which will never let pollen grain actually land on its stigma. So, this is the barrier in calotropis that avoids self-pollination even after being bisexual. Now, what will happen? This pollinia whole will be taken up by the wind, and with the wind, this sac-like structure will disrupt, will degenerate, and will let the pollen grains set free. Now, these pollen grains can land on the other calotropis flower, but not on the same. Understood? Yes, ma'am. Another important beta contrivance device to promote cross-pollination is self-incompatibility. Self means self. Incompatibility means not fit. So, when the pollen grain of the same species or of the same plant falls on its own stigma, then stigma reject it. It says we are incompatible, self-incompatibility. Correct? The stigma if only allows the pollen grains from some other plant of the same species to germinate, then that is called as self-incompatibility. And there can be two reasons of self-incompatibility. One is morphological, which is also known as heterostyle. And second one, which actually I was telling you, is genetical self-incompatibility, where I said that the stigma of the same plant, of the same flower, is not ready to accept its own pollen grain. So first let's talk about heterostyle type of self-incompatibility. Heterostyle beta means different length of filament and style. Huge difference in the length of style and filament of the sex organs. Now see, there are two conditions. Number one is, this is the thalamus. You yourself will say, ma'am, yes ma'am, this is highly morphological incompatibility. A condition. And this is the B condition, see. Now you can see in A condition beta, the stigma is quite high than the anther. In B condition, stigma is very low because of the small style and filament is long, so anther are very high. Now, even after being bisexual, it is very difficult for them to show self-pollination. Rather, due to so much of difference in their length, they will prefer cross-pollination. That means this thing or this thing. Understood? So when there's a great difference in the length of the filament and style of the sex organ, then they prefer cross-pollination than self-pollination. The diagram is self-explanatory. Okay, I hope you have understood till here. Now beta, moving ahead with the second topic, that is genetical self-incompatibility. Genetical means when genes do not allow. See, the self-incompatibility controlling gene is represented by symbol S. This S gene is represented by 6 different alleles. So, the self-incompatibility gene, not much is there in your syllabus for this. Gene is S. This S gene is represented by 6 different alleles. Which are S1, S2, S3, S4, S5 and S6. Right? Now what happens, suppose if the pollen grain, which is haploid will contain only one allele out of the 6. Suppose this is my pollen grain which is carrying S1 allele of the gene, and this is the stigma which is diploid, so it will carry any 2. Now if this pollen grain having S1 allele of the gene falls on the stigma, then because stigma itself is having S1, so this pollen grain, even if it falls, then due to same allelic combination, this pollen grain will not germinate on its own stigma. So this is known as self-genetic incompatibility, where pollen grains bringing the same allele as that of stigma for the S gene are not allowed to grow. So this is self-incompatibility, where the same allele combination do not germinate. Getting my point? Yes or no? So these all are the contrivances that promote cross-pollination. I hope you have understood. Now, we are going to discuss the agents of pollination. First, starting with, now, agents beta, they can be of two types. Biotic agents means where living organisms are involved for the transmission, whereas abiotic agents where non-living things like water and wind play important role in the transmission. Correct? Water pollinated plants are called as hydrophilous flower, hydrophily. Whereas wind pollinating flowers or wind pollination is known as anemophily. So one is hydrophily and one is anemophily. Now what is this anemophily and what is this hydrophily? Let's try to understand. Now even if you ask that which is preferred, wind or water, then my answer will be wind. Most of the common abiotic agent for pollination is wind. First point. This is the most common agent of abiotic pollination. Right? Second, what are the characteristic features for the plants which are pollinated by wind? First of all, beta, the pollen grains for such wind pollinating flowers are very light in weight. They are non-sticky. If they are light, then they will be easily swayed away by the wind. If they are non-sticky, then pollen grains won't stick to each other. Their mass is not going to increase. They're not going to become heavy in weight, and hence they can be easily again swayed away by the wind. So first characteristic feature for wind pollinating plants is pollen grains are non-sticky and light in weight. Right? Second point. Beta, pollen grains should come in the wind. The responsibility is of the anther, and anther will let pollen grain come in the wind if the stamen length, if the filament length is too long. See, filament will be short. See, this is the condition. If suppose this is a flower and this is the condition. If the filament length is too small, then anther is very close inside the flower. Pollen grains will come out and those pollen grain will remain inside the flower. Wind will not get the opportunity to carry the pollen grains. Hence, the length of the filament has to be long so that anthers are exposed in the wind, and the pollen grains, as soon as they are released, they are swayed away by the wind. So second point is filaments should be long to expose anthers. Similarly, beta, the stigma. See, anthers are high and they have released pollen grain. Wind has taken them. But now stigma should be feathery, should be sticky, should be catchy, so that soon it comes in contact with the pollen grains, it sticks to it. The pollen grains should not get carried away along with the wind even after landing on stigma. So stigma for wind pollinating flowers should be sticky, exposed. Stigma should also be high above in the air. Suppose here is the stigma, then how wind will pollinate the pollen grain and will allow it to settle on the stigma. So like anther, stigma should also be exposed, sticky and feathery, so that soon it can catch the pollen grains from the wind. So third point is the receptor, that is stigma, should also be sticky, feathery, and well exposed, so that it can also easily catch the pollen grain. Right? I hope first 3 points you have understood. Next, wait, let me add one page first. Okay. Next important feature of wind pollinating flowers, beta, here, no insects, no living organisms are involved. See, when living organisms are involved in any of the work, then there should be some reward given to them. But if wind is involved in pollination, if water is involved in pollination, flowers need not to get very attractive, they need not to produce nectar. Even a very simple flower, inconspicuous flower, not brightly colored, no nectar flower, is also ready for wind pollination. Wind is even ready to carry their pollen grains even if they don't provide all such things, because wind is non-living. Wind is not going to get attracted. Wind is simply moving. Let pollen grains come in the wind. Then wind will carry away those pollen grains. As a result, this method of pollination with the help of wind is very economical, as flowers need not to be showy, brightly colored, scented. Again, this is a kind of conservation of energy. So next point is characteristic features. Flowers are not showy, large, or producing nectars. Flowers are very simple, inconspicuous, born in inflorescence, not attractive, simply conserving energy, right? Thus, plants are conserving energy by using wind as pollination. Right? Yes or no? One more characteristic feature is there, beta. The plants which are wind pollinated, in their ovary, they usually have one ovule. So ovaries have one ovule only if it is wind pollinated. So this is also one of the characteristic feature of wind pollinating flowers. Some example of wind pollinating flowers are like the members of Poaceae family: wheat, rice, maize, sugarcane. All these are beta pollinated by wind, which is one of the most common used abiotic agents. That's why you see the flowers of rice wheat, they are not attractive, they are not showy, but they are well exposed. They are born in compact inflorescence. No khushbu, no scent is there like in rose. Why? Because they are pollinated simply by wind. They don't want such features. Correct? Understood everyone? What is wind pollination and how are the characteristic features helping in wind pollination of respective plants? Correct. Very good. Next is hydrophily or water pollinating plants. So plants which are pollinated by water is known as hydrophily. Beta, it is the least method of pollination, which is only restricted to 30 genera of monocot. The least method of transmission of gamete is water. So you can say first point, least preferred medium for pollination. Medium for pollination. Second point, it is restricted to only 30 genera of monocot plants. It is restricted to only 30 genera of monocot plants. Even the plant which are hydrophilous, even the plants like water lily and lotus, they are aquatic. Still, they don't prefer water for pollination. They prefer pollination by agents, biotic agents like insect. So this point is also very important. Even aquatic plants, like water lily and lotus beta prefer insects for pollination or wind rather than water. See, insect or wind for pollination instead of any other water. They prefer insect or wind. Can you see this thing? Yes or no? Correct. Now there are two types of hydrophily, epihydrophily and hypohydrophily. So there can be two types of water pollination, one above water pollination, another underground water pollination. That is epihydrophily. Epi means when pollination is taking place above water. Like in case of Vallisneria, also known as beta tape grass. This is dioecious plant, commonly known as tape grass. And second is hypohydrophily, my dear. That means pollination which is taking place underwater, like you see in Zostera. It is a marine plant commonly called as sea grass. Hypohydrophily means underwater pollination, right? Which is seen in case of a marine plant, Zostera, which is commonly known as sea grass. Tape grass, sea grass. Understood till here? Whatever is being written on the screen, is it clear to each and every one of you? If yes, then little bit I am going to tell you about epi and hydrophily. Little bit information, not the much details we are going to do over here. Chalo. Now just see. For epihydrophily. Okay, first let's write the common points. The common features for hydrophily plants like Vallisneria and Zostera. First, beta, pollen grains should be non-wettable. Pollen grains, they are usually surrounded by a mucilage, because of which they are non-wettable. See, if they will become wet, they will become heavy in density and they will sink to the bottom and will never get pollinated. In that case, it is very, very important that pollen grains should not get wet. And how? Because they are surrounded by mucilaginous coating. So, pollen grains are beta. They are surrounded by mucilaginous coat. As a result, they do not wet themselves. They do not get wet. Second point. If it is epihydrophily, then pollen grains should be lighter in weight. If it is hypohydrophily, then pollen grains are long, filamentous, ribbon-like. Correct? So, second point, for epihydrophily, beta, pollen grains are lighter in weight so that they can float on the surface of water in search of their stigma. Correct? Pollen grains are lighter in weight. Second, if it is hypohydrophily, then these pollen grains are long ribbon-like. Like this. Right? Yes or no? Beta, in case of epihydrophily, what happens? The main stalk of the female flower, that is pedicel, it becomes long. Thus, it brings the flower on the surface of water. Pollen grains are already there. They float, they pollinate. Then the stalk of the flower, that is pedicel, it again coils back and take the flower down. So simply flower comes above the surface of water to pick up the pollen grain. Pollination done above the water, flower goes down. But in hypohydrophily, what happens? The pedicel is not long. The female flower is still below. So there the pollen grains have to float, and for that they are long ribbon like, so that they can easily swim in the water in search of their female flower, and thus pollination takes place underwater. So what happens in epihydrophily? Flower, female flower comes above the water due to long pedicel. Pollination done, goes back. Hypohydrophily, no such long pedicel. Female flower remains underwater. Pollen grains are going to swim, they are long ribbon like, towards the female flower. So this is how water pollination is done. But yes, you see, it is so tricky that plants, even which are aquatic, they do not prefer this medium. They go for other agents of pollination like insects or wind. So this is all about abiotic agents. From next class, we will start with biotic agents and more interesting concepts of this chapter. I hope you all have understood till here. So for today, we are going to keep this much. Some homework is there for you as usual. Homework number 1, homework number 2, and yes, with this, I would say thank you for watching the entire lecture, for bearing with my information, which is very, very important if you're actually preparing for NEET. Beta, if you are serious for NEET, then make sure that you take these lectures also very seriously. We are taking lot of pain to teach you, but yes, it is all going to be fruitful if you really study well. So yes, do study, be consistent. Thank you for joining me. Bye-bye. Take care.